I've decided to start doing normal reviews again, so today I'm going to talk about The Queen's Gambit, the newest Netflix miniseries phenomenon. The series was created and directed by Scott Frank, who's written with James Mangold in the past, and whose previous writer-director credits include A Walk Among the Tombstones, and an earlier Netflix miniseries, Godless, which makes me think he's got some sort of deal with Netflix where he's just making 7-episode shows now. So this one, The Queen's Gambit, follows the fictional Elizabeth Harmon's rise to chess domination, fueled by drugs and rivalries with fellow chess players. Now, Netflix has been pushing this one on me. Apparently it's their #1 show this month, but I feel like its main source of advertisement is people just tweeting about how much it owns to watch Anya Taylor-Joy do drugs and humiliate men twice her age at chess. And rightly so, honestly. I enjoyed it as a chess novice, and I think it's pretty interesting timing to release a show like this while chess is seeing such a dominant rise in streaming. Streaming as in Twitch players streaming chess, not Netflix streaming a show about chess. However, I do have mixed feelings about the series overall. It kind of plays out like a sports biopic a little bit, and I guess the whole conceit of a biopic is that what we're watching happened to some extent. You know, that's why the genre so often gets away with structural choices that diminish tension and conflict. So it makes you wonder why a piece of fiction would choose to adhere to that format, would want to adhere to that format. There's a dynamic between certain narrative films and certain documentaries, in which the documentaries are good because they feel like narrative films and vice versa, and I feel like that's sort of what Frank's going for here. But that's not really the case with biopics. Biopics that feel like real, fictional movies are great, but I feel like fictional stories presented as biopics don't quite have the same pizzazz. And the music here especially makes the series feel trapped in a hackneyed genre. But biopic is a controversial term, and this isn't a video about biopics, so I'll hold off on any more biopic takes until a later date. I think it's ultimately frustrating because the series does introduce a lot of interesting ideas. I think my favorite part of the whole thing is Marielle Heller's character, Alma. She's all sorts of anxious and vulnerable, but also occasionally laid back in a lifestyle that amounts to a really interesting portrait of the sort of casual 50s and 60s domestic alcoholism that's pretty much evolved today into the Facebook wine mom. I would have watched a whole series about that. Not to mention how spot on and layered Heller's performance is. The whole cast is great, actually. So many actors I see in supporting roles and always want more of, specifically Thomas Brodie-Sangster and Harry Melling. I guess they're still in supporting roles here, and I could have used more of them, but it's a 7-hour movie, so they get their minutes in. The rest of the supporting cast is also pretty great, and it goes without saying that Anya Taylor-Joy successfully carries the series with her performance, cycling through this supporting ensemble. But as I mentioned, there are all these neat ideas, and for as much time as the show has to explore them, it doesn't really go all that in depth. Beth plays a kid who aspires to be the world champion by 16, and she asks him what he plans to do after, and that concept just doesn't compute with him. But then when, spoiler, Beth becomes the world champion at like 22, there's not a huge indicator of her plans. Even if her plan is to just keep playing chess and, like Borgov says, die with her head on a chessboard, we can make inferences, which is fine, but we don't really get any sense of reckoning with her life outside of chess, aside from the friends she made along the way. She has stuff going on in her life, of course, but she can always bury herself in chess, and I guess what I'm suggesting the problem here is that by the time she reaches the top and can't bury herself in chess anymore, everything's kind of already worked itself out for her. This is a thematic idea, but I think it also has a lot to do with character motivation. The reason why Beth enjoys chess is pretty well established. She's been traumatized by authority figures in her life who struggle to cope with their own distresses, partly in a facility that prescribes archaic solutions to these distresses, and in a world where everything seems to be so influenced by abuse and emotional capacity, chess is a world of order, an escape where things make unwavering mathematical sense. Then, as she moves up the ranks, she sees emotion creeping itself into the game, manipulation that leads her to trust or miss certain lines, and the contrast between emotional players and emotionless players. So here we see a fundamental source of conflict, the world of emotion threatening the security she has in chess, an inability to keep hiding herself in the game, the notion that maybe facts and logic do care about your feelings. And then they set her opponent up to be the most calculated, emotionless chess player on the planet, and she wins by just calculating harder than him, I guess. I've watched some game analysis because they actually had some pretty legit chess consultants, and it's a single blunder that costs Borgov the final game, which makes the whole thing kind of feel like The Flash, where Beth just needs to run faster and she wins. As it turns out, Borgov isn't as stoic as he was made out to be. He plays the game because he loves it, and he's just really calculated. But I sort of lost track of what conclusion the show is trying to arrive at. What does it mean that Beth won, and what do the means by which she won mean? Now, a big aspect of the story is that she's a girl chess player, and of course the stigma goes that women are too emotional to do the things that men do, and for this reason, it would have been a questionable implication if she had implemented emotion to help her win in the end. So I think the show does a good job having Beth not even overcome this stigma, but just circumvent it, have nothing to do with it. And I think this approach is one of the reasons this show is so popular. All of the sources of conflict you would expect from a story like this, drug addiction, relationships, that sense of emotion I just talked about, avoid the typical pitfalls of these conflicts. Her fallings out with the men in her life are pretty tame, she pretty much rejects the questions about being a woman, and the drug problem never gets out of hand. She suffers no withdrawal symptoms, her chess game doesn't suffer at all, and even at her rock bottom, she hits her head and is just fine. I appreciate this as a response of sort of fatigue with these story cliches. It's not like I'm asking for her to suffer more, but when you take these things away, you lose a sense of stake that should then be fulfilled by other means. Without a convincing threat that maybe she won't pull it together, and without a strong sense of why she wants to achieve her goal aside from just being the best at her craft, there's a lack of payoff at the end, and the result is that biopic feeling I mentioned. By becoming the world champion, Beth honors Mr. Scheibel, who taught her to play chess. She honors Alma, who took her to all the chess competitions. Her achievement brings her and her friends together. She overcomes her trauma, her drug abuse. She befriends national Cold War rivals, becomes a figure of hope for both the US and the USSR. I mean, this all sounds like pretty cathartic stuff, but not a lot of it was threatened all that seriously. All these eggs are placed in the basket of, will Beth beat Borgov in the championship? And even though the drugs and her relationships influence whether or not she'll beat Borgov, the Borgov threat mostly just plays out in typical sports movie plot beats, which overshadows all the other things that are going on. It's a feel-good ending, if a bit airy, and I feel like after 7 hours, I would want a bigger payoff than just, oh, that was nice. And honestly, I'd say it's fine that the story breezes over these pitfalls, and I'd have a stronger reaction to the ending if the characters were better developed, because what we have at the end pretty much is the friends we made along the way. Don't get me wrong, I love all these guys, and the brothers specifically work best in a more comedic relief role, but I can't help but feel like for as long as the runtime is, we don't learn a whole lot about any of these people. That's why Alma's the best character. There's constant intrigue from what's hinted at that we don't presently know, new layers we see in her, active changes she undergoes, a clear underlying conflict, and she dies before she can outstay her welcome. But it's not just that she doesn't stay around long enough to become boring. She enters the show in episode 2 and dies in episode 4, and she still has more development than any of the other characters besides Beth, who are in the whole thing. Maybe episode breakdown isn't the best metric because her screen time in minutes could be more than these other characters, but even Jolene, who's a kid in the first episode and doesn't come back until the last episode, has more interesting stuff going on in her life in just the few minutes we have with her. Maybe it's because we don't have to actually see any of these things, but I don't know, I feel like that's the case with any character, right? Beth and Beltic have a brief romance, and we're trying to read some of his anxiety, and then eventually, seemingly out of nowhere, he declares he doesn't love chess anymore and leaves. There's always a sense that Beth is more invested in chess than the relationship and doesn't really care about Beltic romantically, and we know from the get-go that she's more skilled than him at the game, but this whole not loving chess thing comes out of nowhere. And that's when I realized we don't really know anything about Beltic, aside from, he got his teeth fixed for Beth, he drove an uncharacteristic car until he totaled it, and he prefers electrical engineering to chess. Benny is a little more interesting. We get a little more insight into his life and psychology. I'd say with him we actually get sufficient information to form proper conclusions about his character. There's even a lot of irony with the sexy way he carries himself, and then looking like this. And who doesn't love a good enemies to lovers meet cute? But like everyone else, he drops out of the story and comes back after coming to some conclusion of his own we're not really clued in on. But he's one of the better characters. I won't drag Benny too hard. Especially when there's towns. the most boring, man-candy character in the whole show. He's very heavy-handedly introduced as a love interest. There's a scene with a lot of sexual tension, and then it's revealed that he's gay. Beth's pretty heartbroken, and then Townes does not appear for the rest of the show until the very end of the last episode. There's a scene where Beth mentions that he's the only person she's been in love with, but we don't really know why. He's flirtatious, and there's chemistry when they're talking about chess publications, but there's no indicator that this is capital L love, or that she's still hung up on him after his departure until this scene. It's not like his absence is a presence in the show, even though it's supposed to be for Beth. He's just absent completely, so we feel nothing when he returns. If anything, we feel a little robbed that it's him she reunites with, and not one of the characters we've spent a lot more time with, who Beth only talks to over the phone for the rest of the film. They all had unresolved conflict with Beth, but for some reason Townes is the one they bookend things with. There was something there, genuine chemistry and conflict, and like everything else in the show, we get no real payoff after being teased with the idea of maybe exploring it, and then moving on to other things. I don't know, maybe I'm being too harsh. There's a lot I like about The Queen's Gambit as a feel-good ensemble piece with some great production design and editing, and I enjoyed it while I was watching it, but I can't shake the feeling that it doesn't do enough to cathartically justify its runtime. Then again though, drug-fueled Anya Taylor-Joy does humiliate men twice her age at chess, so... The last thing I want to talk about is the notion of propaganda and stereotypes in the show. The main criticism is that it's anti-communist propaganda. There's, of course, the Russian kid who can't fathom life after chess, and the monologue describing Borgov's chess style is comically propaganda sounding.
Every move he made was so obvious, so unimaginative, so bureaucratic.
Lack of imagination or creativity is like the staple anti-communist talking point, I guess because it's so tied to the rhetoric of American individuality and all that. That said, I don't think the show is anti-communist, despite this speech. There are so many other scenes where the main characters make fun of the Christian, communist-fearing American mindset. We see that the Soviet players are also playing the game out of passion rather than state sanction, and it's even explained that they're such a strong chess force because they work together communally during adjournments to figure out the best routes, even though when they show it, it looks like a scene from Chernobyl. And then after that explanation, our main characters do just that in order to win. I think it's more that the series is setting up an expectation about the Russians, an image distilled through American filters that's then broken when Beth sees what these guys are actually like. Now, one could argue that the show doesn't do enough to subvert this image, and that the Russians are still a stereotypically, propagandistically stoic representation here, but I'm not exactly equipped to agree or disagree with that take. And this whole thing is distracting people from the inarguable caricature, the French woman Cleo, who enters the show with her hands full of baguettes and leads Beth into a sex and drug-filled excursion. And they don't even try to qualify or subvert this like they did with the Russians. This is just France in the show's eyes. And I mean, I wasn't there. I don't know what it was like, but I don't know. The baguettes really got to me. There's this take and drinking game where you drink every time there's a baguette, and it's startling how many there are. Anyway, I feel like I can't give The Queen's Gambit a pass on that one. Sorry, Scott Frank. So that's my take on the show. Here's a number. I'll give The Queen's Gambit a high 6. If you have any qualms with that, you can let me know in the comments, or we can settle things on the board. You can find me at Taylor Chess Guy on Lee Chess. I'm fucking terrible, so if you ever disagree with my takes, you can just demolish me in chess and hopefully feel better. Until then, I'm signing off. Links to my social media and Patreon are in the description. As always, thanks for watching, and hey, have a nice day.